Okay, so next bit of housekeeping. Bob doesn't like his sermons interrupted. If he does fall asleep during his sermon, I will wake him up. But please, can you save your questions to the end of the talk? And please, if you want to ask a question, can you use the raise hand function, which is in the participants window, or if you can't find that, put a chat in the chat box, and we'll take the questions in turn at the end of Bob's talk. So that's the hands up and the chat line. And now let's just check the time. It's 8:05. It's time to get going. It gives me very great pleasure to welcome Bob tonight. He's had a busy day. He's been online all afternoon because he's been receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award, which I'm sure is very much well deserved. And I'm sure he'll be telling us about it later on, but he's been rubbing shoulders virtually with the great and the good, receiving awards all afternoon. So we're honoured to have you tonight, Bob. Author, clergyman, mountaineer, sailor, explorer, adventurer, and much more important, that mentor to many of us. Bob, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Multiple award winners, awards won, Barton Cups, Tilman Medals, Yachtsman of the Year, the Piolet d'Or, which not many sailors have won, if any. And most important of which, your most prized award, I think, was given this summer when you became the port officer for the Ocean Cruising Club for the Hebrides and Oban, and thoroughly recommend anybody who's sailing in that direction to get in touch with Bob when you reach Oban. Bob, please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and thank you too for those who have already written and said we're much looking forward to your lecture. Of course, this puts no pressure on me to deliver the goods, of course, but maybe slightly different this evening, though it is a straightforward blow-by-blow account of an expedition. But is anything straightforward when you have the Wild Bunch? Well, that brings me to another point. It's become a tradition, no, almost a necessity, that whenever I give a lecture, it has to start with the video. Even when I was talking to the Royal Yacht Squadron, no less, about the Northwest Passage, which had nothing to do with the Wild Bunch, a Lord Chief Justice of the realm was heard to remark, you will start with the video, won't you? So, folks, we're going to start with the video. Start quietly and slowly back.
I've got to cut the hands.
Yeah, clap them.
1, 2, 3, go. Is that it?
No, just clap.
Just clap,
right, and then say 1, 2, 3.
Then you go. 1, 2, 3.
No, start again. A little slower.
1, 2, 3.
When there's fishes, storm at sea, and all the ships are safe at shore, there's a tiny little sailboat that keeps sailing on for more. Oh, through hurricanes and cyclones, 40-meter waves and more. What's the name of that mighty sailboat that never goes to shore? It's the Dodo's Delight, it's the Dodo's Delight, shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's Delight, it's the Dodo's Delight, it's the Dodo's Delight, shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's Delight. Oh, she'll sail straight through an iceberg like butter through a knife. She bounces over rocks like a chicken on the moon. Oh, well, tell me who's the captain who commands that mighty ship? It's Captain Rev Bob. Hear the cracking of the whip. It's the Dodo's Delight, it's the Dodo's Delight, shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's Delight, it's the Dodo's Delight, it's the Dodo's Delight, shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's Delight. Well, she's always nice and tidy, and the deck is always clean. There's wine and chocolates plenty, the captain's never mean. What's that sound, boy? Can you hear it? It's like music to my ear. It's the sound of Dodo singing. I can hear it loud and clear. It's the Dodo delight. It's the Dodo delight. Shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo delight. It's the Dodo delight. It's the Dodo delight. Shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo delight. You want to sail the Dodo? Well, you better be tough. The crew is not so pretty. They're looking kind of rough. They don't always smell like roses. Their socks often stank. And if they were too soft, they were made to walk the plank. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. Shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. Shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's delight. Well, there's Solly on his squeeze box, Nico on his mandolin. Out Sean played with his whistle. The spoons are played by Ben. Oh, well, tell me what's the venue? Where's the concert done tonight? In the middle of the ocean on the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. Shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. Shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's delight.
I am captain of this ship, and I like her neat and tidy. Sailing on a bowline, hard on the wind. We will cross the ocean. We will weave through the ice. And why? Because it's nice.
It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. Shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. Shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's delight. Shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo's delight. Shining bright and blue and white. It's the Dodo's delight. It's the Dodo. 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 It's the Dodo.
Quite ridiculous. This is only a practice, don't do anything. Fuel the moment. Ready to drop.
This is Dodo's Delight. We are getting closer to Iceberg Field.
Hey!
So the Wild Bunch. Well, of course, they're not wild at all, really, but when I first was in contact with them, I got this email saying, do you know where there are any big wolves in Greenland? And so I looked up their website and I found them bouncing up and down high fives, yelling, screaming, dancing, and so I immediately dubbed them the Wild Bunch, and for some reason that seems to have stuck. In actual fact, of course, they are highly professional and extremely talented climbing, right at the top of their game and right up there doing world-class routes. Here they are, in fact, at the top of Impossible Wall, 850 meters, that's what, 2,700, 800 feet of extreme rock, E7 in English terms, 513D in American terms, having just been 11 days on the face. They're actually talented musicians as well, so hopefully you've just heard. When they were on this climb, they were stuck for 3 days in the rain, and they sat on their portaledges, jammed into the face, and proceeded to while away the time, strumming on their instruments and making new songs. I love them, of course, and one of the reasons why I like them so much is that though they climb very seriously and very serious routes, they don't take themselves seriously, as you've just seen. And that's quite a rare commodity in professional climbers these days who are concerned about their image. So, the Wild Bunch. Well, a little bit about the boat. The boat is a westerly 33-foot discus, a production model, GRP, that's fiberglass. Obviously, steel or aluminium would be better if you're going into ice, and which we were, of course. But it was the only boat that I had, and anyhow, we had to sell our house to buy it in the first place. And it is just really a production westerly with 2 modifications. When we were going around the world, or about to go around the world and around Cape Horn, my son, who trained originally as a boat builder, was concerned about the fact that we just had an ordinary spray hood. So he made that extremely efficient and beneficial fiberglass cuddy, which has been a great boon ever since. Then over the years, I have added an inner forestay here. First of all, a removable inner forestay with a hanked-on sail. We sailed around Cape Horn like that, and actually it was very hard work. Then it became permanent, and then finally permanent with a roller reefing head sail on it. Why? Because in stormy weather, that's the very time you do not want to go up onto your foredeck and sort halyards out, maybe hank on the sail, and generally make yourself useful up there. We can now do it, both mainsail, both head sails, all from the cockpit. So that was the boat that we had, and that's the boat that I've used for many, many years, and it's looked after us very well, even though it is just an ordinary production boat. Well, let's start the innings then. When we returned from the second transit of the Northwest Passage here to Assiat, and I put that in really just as a thank you and an acknowledgement to Maggie Nelson. Who is Maggie Nelson? Well, she is the person who draws those splendid maps for us in Flying Fish, often describing our ventures and putting in our track. Our cartographer par excellence, and it's just a thank you to you, Maggie, for all the work that you do for us. But when we returned from the second transit of the Northwest Passage to Assiat, we were forced to leave the boat in the winter in this trot amongst and beside a very classy steel Colin Archer, Anna, a Swedish boat, which had also done the Northwest Passage, and we'd met them whilst we were doing it. In past years, I had been able to pull out at the big boatyard in Assiat, because in those days, Frank was the manager, and he was very friendly and helpful, and I think it's a bit of a concession he just charged us £1,000. But now, under new management, unfortunately, Frank was a chain smoker, and so eventually he did die of cancer. And now, under new management, the fees had rocketed up from £1,000 to £6,000. Well, as a wee Scot from the west coast of Scotland, this was prohibited. So there was no way that we could pay £6,000. So we determined, and in fact did, winter the boat in the water there at Asyut. The crew had gone home by this time. I left the boat there, flew back home, spent the winter at home, and next spring returned to find that the other boats had moved, including the guy who was meant to be looking after our boat, but there was Anna and ourselves. Went aboard and had a look round, all seemed to be well, but when I looked a little bit more closely, oh dear, there was considerable damage to the top sides on the port side. What had happened was, I have just recently put that fender in there when I got on board. What had happened in the winter was there was a big storm before we were finally iced in. And this burst all the fenders and cut through the lines holding the tires that I'd put there. And so the boat was banged up against the steel column archer, and this damage was done. Well, it looked pretty bad. Was this going to be the end of the expedition? So all I could do was go to the shop at the boatyard and buy a lot of fiberglass paste and push it into this crack as far as I could, and try and shape the old rubbing strake, or rather that part on the top there, and make it look as good as possible. And it did look pretty good. And I thought I got away with it. Actually, 2 years later, when we crossed the Atlantic and a concrete wave banged into the side in a storm, water shot through the saloon down below. So it was actually more serious than we thought. But at the time, it seemed to be okay, and the expedition could continue. So sure enough, the Wild Bunch came out in Wild Bunch mode, as you would expect. And it was great to see them again. And they loved the fact that they were coming back to the boat, and Ben particularly, the romance of it being just the same as it was the few years before when we'd had an expedition together. And it was great to join up. There is an in-climbing joke here, because being an old traditionalist, a traditional climber, I don't like any artificial aids, and particularly bolts, which people drill into the rock to make sure that they're completely safe. And I had caught a sight of an email from Ben saying, oh, well, I might just bring some bolts just in case. So I got hold of a big container, and as a joke, of course, and written no bolts in big letters on it. But Ben knew exactly how to deal with that, the bad boy. Well, we bought stores, we refueled, and we set off. A couple of miles north of Asyut, when we turned the corner, we found this school, is that the right word? School of Wales, which put on quite a show for us as we set off across Disco Bay. We continued across Disco Bay. We started a little bit late in the day, so 2/3 of the way across, we put into, and I can never get the name right, I had to look up Andrew's book to find how it was spelled, Crown's Princess Island. In other words, Crown Prince's Island. I cannot pronounce the Danish right correctly. It was quite tricky getting in, a narrow gully passage through here. But when we were there, it was a pleasant pool, and there was this abandoned old Inuit settlement, which was of interest. Ben went ashore and put up a time-lapse camera. And in the big film, or the main film that Sean made of the expedition, there's rather a nice shot where the boat's facing that way, and an iceberg zooms in a few seconds across that way. There's a little bit of a wait, the boat turns around with the tide, and the iceberg zooms back that side as well. Well, we've spent a pleasant afternoon and night there, and then we continued on round the west side of Disco Island, round Noosak, and into Umanak Bay, past icebergs, of course. And this fog bank gradually overtook us and then enveloped us completely. It was rather strange because the fog bank was coming up from behind us, from the west, but there was a strong east wind. And there we were in fog with a strong east wind. And getting a bit fed up with this, I turned towards the coast and got as close into the coast as I could. And suddenly we came out of all that mist and clag into beautiful sunshine, calm conditions, and left the mist, clag, and wind there behind us. The lads went ashore and had a little walk around to keep fit, and we spent the night there before continuing on further into Umanak Bay. And of course, there's always, with the Wild Bunch, there's always music. Usually starting at about 10 o'clock at night when I'm trying to get into my bunk, and going on to about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, but we'll go hurriedly over that. We continued on, and in the early hours of the morning, we found a little passage through the shoreline of this island, and came round to get to the Kerasak settlement there. You can hardly see it, with this iconic mountain standing there above it. We tied up to a fishing boat at about 6 o'clock in the morning and fell into our bunks and got some sleep. The next day we went out into the fjord, the neighboring fjord, and had quite a long look round, but we were looking, of course, for rock to climb. But none of them really came up to the standard that they wanted, or they thought it might have been a bit loose. That looks a good line. What about that? No, I don't think that will quite do. I think that's loose there, and anyhow, it's not quite hard enough. And so it all came to nothing, and we returned to Kerasak, to this mountain. Sean went up and had a look, and he came along here, and he thought that this arete here on the right-hand side of this buttress looked not too loose after all, and possibly would make a good climb. And there was always, of course, the Alpine type bridge here to be climbed as well. So
we set sail from the sweet coast, and we were sailing away with a cargo of bricks for the Grand City Hall in New York. 'Twas a wonderful craft, she was rigged fore and aft. Oh, how the wild wind blowed her, she took several blasts, and she stood 7 masts. And we called her the Irish Rover. Du beau caillou. Allez.
Merci. Un peu de litière de chat.
Un peu de litière de chat. Au moins une belle vue, quoi. My God, what a shock! The boat, it turned right over. It turned 9 times around, and the poor old dog was drowned. I'm the last of the Irish Rover.
Who's that?
What I'd really like to do is push the boat bow into that and see whether it would open it up enough to actually crack it open.
It does not seem like a good idea, Bob. I think the only thing that's going to crack open is the bow itself.
Well, that is just a slight inconvenience to the operation, I grant you.
we have an iceberg that's grounded on top of our anchor, so we can't take the anchor up, so we're stuck here.
The idea is to lighten the ice flow so that when it's high water, it floats.
So Bob has prepared some hammers and axes, and he's going to try and break the iceberg. Oh my god, it looks like a bad idea.
Don't get that overhang falling on you.
So as you can see, our captain is gone mad. Oh jeepers.
Well, he works actually. Oh, Bob, stay here.
Bob, let it go, let it go. Move away, Bob, move away, move away, move away. Oh my god, he is Moses. Oh my god, oh my god. He was there just a few seconds ago, he was there.
What happened?
Like Moses through the Red Sea, he cut through the iceberg with an axe.
How did that happen?
Look at that thing.
You must have great strength, Bob.
It's gone off the anchor, I think, Bob.
I'm glad I moved away when that big bit came out.
Yeah, that would have been hilarious.
All of the day's work, you know. 2 or 3 blows from that and the thing exploded. Well, anyhow, we've achieved our object. Well, after those shenanigans, we went in search of more rock to climb. And we were rather attracted to this buttress, which I immediately dubbed Goliath, because it was big, bold, brazen, and beastly. I'm not stretching your biblical knowledge too far, I hope. But we could land at the bottom here. There was a ledge, and have a look. I thought it looked pretty solid, but in fact, I thought this was quite good as well, but it turned out to be extremely loose. And poor Ben, who doesn't really like loose rock at all, had quite a bad time to get through there. But they established themselves and they began to climb. Nico and Ben on the left-hand side of the buttress. Rather curious type of rock here. It almost looks like solidified sandstone, but it was good, and it was not loose. It was solid, and they made steady progress there. Sean and Ollie on the right-hand side took this cracked line up. So they made 2 routes on this comparatively narrow buttress, but it got them going. Of course, both routes were in the extreme grades. When they got to the top, they had to walk right along this ridge here in order to find an easy way down like this to get back to the boat. Well, we went round to the northern side of this unpronounceable island and found this rather pleasant pool between the island itself and this outcrop of rock. And what do you do when you're chilling out from having done several climbs? Well, you go bouldering, of course. Bouldering is a way that climbers have of just keeping the fingers, toes, body in trim, ready for the next big event. And it was sunshine, and we enjoyed 2 days of bouldering there in this little pool, or where the boat was, in the little pool to the north of the island. Lunch break here, but of course not for Sean. I should have given you their names. Sean Villanueva O'Driscoll, who is Irish, Spanish, and Belgian. These two, the Favres brothers, Nico and Ollie, both Belgian as well. So 3 Belgians, and Ben, the American. Ben is a professional photographer, which helps also. So we enjoyed 2 or 3 days in the sun, bouldering, but then the wind started to howl down what I'd already dubbed Windy Gulch here. And again, you don't, with still shots, you don't get really a feel of the sea, but the wind was getting up, the waves became quite choppy, and we had quite difficulty getting, well, first of all, our line ashore back, and then our bower anchor, which was down here, back on board, and then indeed the hedge, which was out the stern in case the boat got spun round, which of course they inevitably do in these mountain environments where the wind goes round and round in circles. And the wind continued to increase. in that video, you may have heard the shout, "This is ridiculous." Well, actually, it was when we were going through the narrow exit from this pool in 42 knots of wind, which of course to you guys with big boats is no problem, but with a 33-foot, that's quite a significant wind strength. And in fact, we spent the rest of the day really looking for a suitable anchorage, one of which at lunchtime, I was woken up by the sound of the anchor dragging along the rocky bottom, rushed up into the cockpit just as the boat was pushed up against a rock, and took 2 turns to get the engine started before we could loose ourselves off and get out again. So in the end, we gave up and made off for Umanak town itself, or rather Umanak Island with the town on it. But the wind was from the south and strong, and I did know that there was something called the West Bay. Well, actually, it's the northwest of the town, and so I thought we might go for that instead. And we went around the corner here, and then fortunately I saw a mast sticking up over the shoreline because I hadn't been into the West Bay before. So I phoned them on the VHF and said, we haven't been in there before. Give us any hints for getting in. They said, well, as long as you stay close to the shore all the way round, you'll be all right. And that's what we did. And we went right in, shot past them, and put our anchor down beneath Umanak Mountain. Umanak, I believe, means heart. I think it must be the heart of a seal, because of whatever direction you look at it, it bears no resemblance to a human heart. I did get in a bit of a row from the crew of Francis B, because we had just shot past them. I'm not quite sure why I did that. Maybe I was anxious to get the anchor down, but we met up later and all was well. Well, here we were north of the town and wanting stores and fuel and so forth. So we began the 2 or 3 mile walk to Umanak town, past the latest recruits for the dog sledging in the winter. And well, I never really did discover what these things were or had been, and why the hunter had hung them up outside his house. But they're fairly grotesque, but anyhow, he was rather proud of them, or anyhow felt it was necessary to display them. So we continued our walk and came to Umanak town, and oh my goodness, the town, the harbour was full, chock-a-block full of ice, even though actually there's a big chain underneath here from one side to the other, but it's at some depth to keep the bigger bergs out from the harbour. But there was no way that we were going to get our boat in there to get fuel and stores, and it was fortunate that we hadn't gone round there the day before to try and get in instead of going to West Bay. So all we could do was put a few provisions in our rucksacks and make our way back to the boat, this happy crew. And it was at this stage that the crew of Francis B, who had also gone into town, came and said hello, and then they came aboard, and of course it turned into a jam session. So Chris Bailey from Tasmania, if you're watching, I haven't forgotten you as you thought, and here you all are on our boat enjoying the sing-song. This gentleman particularly enjoyed the tale of the Irish rover. He'd heard it before, and he was very glad that we were singing it once again to him. Well, I don't know whether they noticed that with 5 climbers on board, the boat is not too tidy, but fairly soon they took their leave and invited us to lunch, and we went onto their boat, and of course it settled into another jam session, another sing-song, and we had a great time together. Well, we had gone for climbing, so once again we were looking around for rock to climb, and here was what they named Funky Tower. And you get some idea of the scale. Here's Sean leading away when you realize that that little tiny dot there is the boat. And in fact, you get even more idea of the scale when you look very closely and you see Sean and Ben here on the face. Ben was having a terrible time because actually the rock was fearfully loose. He was all for going down, but Sean will climb anything. Greasy, grassy, overhanging, doesn't matter. As long as he's climbing, he's happy. So, no, I think we can go on. And he took over the lead, so Ben didn't do any of the leading and continued up the climb. Nico and Ollie had already tried on a climb further over to the right here, but it was loose and they aborted and came back to the boat. This actually was the view from Sean and Ben on the face. And I put that in because it illustrates very well something that you all know anyhow, and that is that there is a great deal more of an iceberg under the water than appears on the top of the water. And that's a very good illustration of it. Well, they continued the climb, Sean and Ben, and towards the top, Ben shouted up to Sean, "Well, how's it going then?" And even Sean was forced to admit, it's terrible. He couldn't find any handholds or any footholds to make progress. But somehow they eventually managed to the top, and in true Wild Bunch style, of course, celebrated. But I have a feeling that this was more from relief than from exaltation at completing the climb. Well, they didn't have to abseil back down. They could walk down because we had brought the boat round to this cove, very pleasant, and they were all able to walk down and to join us. I had to put that in because it's such a lovely picture. We wended our way through some of these icebergs, and later that day, because we were chilling out now, we went bouldering. Some, as you will notice, with more success than others. And indeed, I came to the conclusion that if you're with professional climbers, it's really best just to let them get on with it. And so that's what I did. But it is a beautiful land. I can't think why you don't all sail up there. But don't, please, because we want to selfishly keep it all for ourselves. But it's a beautiful land and a land for adventure. But we must remember that actually we are interlopers. The Inuit have been there for centuries and have been using the water for centuries and have managed to survive for centuries. Here they are in a replica of their old kayaks. Notice the long, thin paddles, and not with the blades at right angles, but thin in order to have less wind resistance when they're paddling against a strong wind. Not for the Inuit are paddles at right angles, having to twist your wrist and get tendinitis or whatever it's called in your wrist and arms. They have, of course, perfected their own technique. Well, at last, the ice was coming away from the east coast of Baffin. All along, the main aim of the expedition had been to go across to Baffin. But the ice sticks obstinately to the east coast of Baffin much longer than it does here, where it is cleared from the west coast of Greenland. But the ice report was showing that at last this huge sheet of ice was coming off the coast. And so we went quickly to Umanak, bought stores, refueled, and set off here with the following wind. I do have a slightly more modern chart than this, but it illustrates our progress very well. We'd sailed up, of course, round Disco into Umanak, Karasak, and there was Umanak Island, and now we were setting off to cross Baffin Bay to go to Clyde River and then round to Samford Fjord, and the bigger illustration of Samford Fjord here. And note particularly the Walker Arm, the Walker Inlet, the Walker Pinnacle, the turret, oops, and just go back, Swiss Bay there, facing the turret, and something there called the Lurking Tower, all of which come into the talk in a moment. Well, it was actually quite a lively passage across. Took us 3 to 4 days. The trouble with, as I say, stills is it doesn't show the wave action. It was actually quite choppy and quite a strong wind, but we sped, therefore, across from Greenland to Baffin. But imagine our surprise on the morning, early morning of the 4th day, when we suddenly came across 2 huge fields of pack ice. Afterwards, of course, I realized that it was that pack ice that I'd seen on the ice chart moving away from the coast. But this was 75 to 80 miles out. And I don't think we'd expected to come across it until we were much closer. But we were able to weave our way easily through. There were leads all the way through. And there were actually quite a lot of polar bears on these ice floes. In fact, Ben counted 8 altogether that we could see as we passed through. I was a little bit concerned about this because I thought 5 miles out and 2 little cubs there, it's a long way to swim back to shore. I really needn't have worried because I learned later that some polar bear had been tracked for 300 miles swimming across the open ocean. So that put me firmly in my place. Well, we made our way, thank you Maggie for a better chart, to the Clyde River, and there we duly checked into Canada at the police station and paid the $25 permit for our rifle in case of polar bears. And one of the policemen bought a copy of my book, so Clyde River is an excellent place, of course. And we were intrigued by the slightly different style of these dories, which the Inuit use for hunting. Both in Greenland and here in Canada, the hunting fishing economy is still a strong part of the economy. But instead of going out in a kayak with a harpoon, they now go out in a dory with a big outboard motor subsidized by the government, and with a rifle, and still hunt the seal, the narwhal, for subsistence, for food, and it is still part of their way of life. Well, we were soon having bought some stores and some more fuel, making our way the 100 miles round to the Samford Fjord. Quite a long fjord is, and we obviously were here coming to the Walker Inlet with the Walker Pinnacle or Tower to the right. I don't know what all that is there, sorry. And we duly made our way. Actually, we had quite a difficulty because one of the problems with these fjords is they're very, very deep. And also the shore, in spite of the scree run here, are very steep too. So we've gone all the way around the edge of here. And just as we came to this point, the motor stopped. Fortunately, the echo sounder was just beginning to show a depth that might possibly hold an anchor. Throw the anchor out, lads, and we almost literally did just that. It threw it out, and it just got a hold sufficiently for us to see what was the matter with the engine, to re-bleed it, and then to move into a more comfortable position. Imagine our surprise one morning when we woke up, and there, almost alongside us, was Novara, Steve Brown's Novara. Well, this was great. They had come to see us, which was really very kind of them. And we went across for coffee, and that was great. And then they asked us for the evening. And naturally, we agreed with the plum and went across and had a marvelous evening together. On the other hand, Tel on Navarra, he took some film of this, and somehow this film found itself to a company that makes films of climbing called Real Rock. And by a clever bit of editing, Real Rock made it look as if I was completely drunk. I wish to take this chance to vociferously deny this charge. It was not, in fact, accurate. Indeed, it was a happy evening, more red wine, and we thoroughly enjoyed the sing-song and the meal and had a great time with them. And we wouldn't have missed it for anything aboard the luxury liner that is Navarra. Well, eventually we got back to the boat in the early hours of the night, and I thought, oh, good, at last we can get into our bunk. Nico, what are you doing? Well, we're making sandwiches. We're going climbing now. Well, I think this was more wine-induced than wise, but all the same, we landed them ashore, and they were going off to climb the Walker Pinnacle here, and Julie walked along the scree and began the climb. We're in the night, of course, but the night, there's always some daylight at this time of year in the Arctic, and they began to climb up the Walker Pinnacle. Meantime, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, or that's how it felt, I found myself motoring across the fjord in order to land Sean and Ben on a buttress on the other side of the Walker Inlet, Walker Fjord here, Walker Arm, in order for them to make a climb up Lurking Tower. Then, having lost a paddle when they went ashore in the dinghy and getting the dinghy back onto the boat, so the climb became known as Up the Creek Without a Paddle. All the same, I got the dinghy onto the boat and returned back to the Walker Inlet in the night. But as you can see, the weather was closing in. And indeed, about half, 2/3 of the way up, when it started to snow on them, Nico and Ollie decided enough was enough and abseiled back down to the shore and to the boat. A long story about the length of time that it took us to get across the fjord again to collect Sean and Ben. Not a good picture, but what I wanted to show you was that it was extremely rough and the wind was blowing, but all the same, Ollie managed to get the little rubber dinghy ashore there to pick Sean and Ben up. We were very glad to be picked up because they had been sheltering under a rock here for about 15 hours, or according to them, they had succeeded in doing their climb. But all the same, they were quite glad to come back to the boat and to be rescued. Well, what do you do if it's raining and you can't climb a route and you can't even climb bouldering outside? Well, if you find a cave and you stitch that up for some bouldering and you pick up some rocks and you do your pull-ups and press-ups and push-ups in order, of course, to keep yourselves fit. Some of us had other things to do. And what is this? Sean Titanic? No, just going in for a morning dip. So actually, it's much quicker just to jump in, which the Wild Bunch did with unfailing regularity. Well, indeed, it did actually have one purpose. It saved a lot of trouble with washing, because on a small boat like this, on a long passage or an expedition, fresh water is only used for drinking and cooking. Everything else, including washing up, including your own washing mainly, has to be in salt water. But of course, Sean then had to do a still life on an ice floe. And, well, I don't know. The caption reads, "No wonder we had no trouble from polar bears." And the caption here reads, "I wonder what they'll get up to next." Well, in fact, what they did get up to was they made a third attempt on climbing the Walker Pinnacle, or by this time it was called Drunken Tower. And here they are starting up, and indeed it was extreme climbing, unremittingly steep, well up into the extreme grades. Fortunately, it was fortunate that they had abandoned previously, because this final tower of the Walker Pinnacle was technically the most difficult of the climb. It was about E5, 512D or so in American terms. And there we are at last at the top, amongst the magnificent scenery of these lands. Well, rejoicing in wild bunch style, but they did actually have a bit of a difficulty getting down, because rock shoes without crampons, without an axe, is not the best way of coming down a snow gully. But they made it duly, and they were very delighted that at last they had climbed this 1,000-meter climb at extreme E5 and had at last completed it. Well, all along I was amazed and incredibly impressed by what I can only call the rock sculpture of this land. To me, of course, it's part of the wonder of God's creation. But it also did show how the glaciers were receding. And if you looked further down the fjord, you had a clear indication of where the glacier had been in centuries past, and on this side too, and how much it had receded. Climate change is a definite fact. I suppose we could debate how much it's due to natural causes and how much is due to our fault. But in any case, it's incumbent upon us to do all we can to alleviate it as far as possible, as far as we are able to do so. Okay, Swiss Arm the turret. Nico and Ollie had their eyes, because no route had been climbed on this turret, this block of rock, and they had their eyes to go up this sheer face here. And so I duly took them across. We landed on the scree. This time they kept the dinghy there and started away, easier buttress to begin with, and then steeping to sheer. But as Nico put it, the cracks just kept on coming, and the rock was amazingly solid, and they had a ball making this climb. In the night, when they got to the summit, they abseiled back down to a convenient ledge in order to undertake what they call a shiver bivvy. Because at this latitude, and with the nights completely dark now for a few hours in the night, however much gear you put on before you climb into your bivvy bag, you're only really going to get about 4 hours sleep before the cold wakes you up. Well, next morning when they did wake up, there was a temporary temperature inversion, and the cloud had formed gone down, as it were, over the top of Sandford Fjord and the Swiss Fjord. They continued on to abseil down, and finally made their way right down this face here, and then through this gully and back down to the scree, and picked up their dinghy. Well, if you think it was like this, I'm afraid you're mistaken. But the problem was I couldn't get a picture, because by this time the wind was gusting up to 30 knots, and it was a short, sharp, horrible sea. And it's very difficult to pick up a small rubber dinghy with 2 climbers and their gear in it in 30 knots of wind. I tried first of all going upwind to them. That was hopeless. As soon as I got close to them, the wind blew off the bow to one side or the other. So in the end, I came slowly downwind, managing to keep it slow by reversing the engine every so often to slow the speed right down. And in this way, I was able to get to the dinghy. They could grasp the guardrail, levered their gear up onto the boat, and then themselves onto the boat, and we were in business once again. Well, we had done a number of climbs, extreme grades, all of them completely free, of course. One of the great things about the Wild Bunch is they don't use any artificial aids. So all these climbs were free, without aid. And again, for me, that's another tremendous thing and tremendous advantage in the way that they climb. But it was time for us to take the 80 miles round to Gibbsfjord to see what we could find round there. So here we are at the entrance to Gibbsfjord with crags on either side, and we made our way up through it. But we spent most of the day, in fact, looking around and peering at these cliffs. Well, that looks quite a good line there, doesn't it? Oh, no, I think that's loose. And anyhow, that's not quite what we want. It's not quite hard enough for us. And finally, we found an arête, or they found an arête, which they thought looked okay, might go, and at any rate, it was a classic line. So the next day, I landed them, and they walked up along the easy ground and put up a tent here, ready to make this climb the next day. And here they are. The rock, in fact, was amazingly good, amazingly solid. All this talk of loose rock around in Gibbsfjord certainly wasn't true on this climb. Here is Nico in an off-width crack, which actually is a pretty awkward thing to climb because it's neither one thing or the next. But they continued, of course, at extremely steep ground, at an extreme high grade. And here we are, as you just see one of them going over the lip at the top there, with a running belay for protection here, as they made their way higher and higher. And of course, Sean had to climb this separated pinnacle. Why? Well, because it's there, and Sean must climb everything anyhow. And so Julie came down a little bit, and they continued the climb. And then, horrors, they found that in the night snow had fallen, and there was a band of snow right across this extreme rock climb. Climbing with smooth rock shoes, no crampons, no ice axe, and not even gloves on extreme rock is not a very easy thing to do. But Sean invented a new climbing technique, which was to hold your hand out into the sun until your fingers restored some blood, taking that hand back and holding the next hand out into the sun before your fingers again unfroze. And in this way, they gradually made their way up past this band of snow and made it to the top, and had completed walking the plank, as they called it, a very classic arête there, again, extreme 512D in American terms, another classic rock climb, and completely free without using any aid. Well, we withdrew to Refuge Harbour, as the name rejoiced. Not quite so much a refuge as you might think, because underneath all this lovely water is in fact a silt bank coming right out. And whereas it's covered at high water like this, at low water it uncovers. And so you must be careful not to anchor on it, or you'll find yourself drying out on the mud when the tide goes out. This actually is where we shot the video, on the beach, and where I shot the polar bears. So fortunately, there weren't any polar bears, but the bullets were real. But Sean had his eye on this intriguing peak here, and he was keen to go across and have a look and to climb it. And he asked whether anybody was interested in coming with him. Ominous silence. Well, if winter had already arrived, we're well into September by now. We've done a number, 9 or 10 extreme routes in this area. Guys, it's time to pull out. So that's what we did. And we went back to Clyde River. Not a particularly easy passage back because it was night and it got dark. There was ice around and it was quite windy out there. So actually we hove to for the night, kept an anchor watch without an anchor, of course, just to make sure that we didn't bump up against any ice floes or icebergs. Here at Clyde River, unfortunately, this ice flow took a liking to our anchor and our anchor chain, and we had quite a job pushing it away and freeing both the chain and the anchor underneath it. But this is where they held a concert on the spreaders. Don't ask me why they held the concert on the spreaders, and I'm not quite sure how much the Inuit actually enjoyed the concert or what they made of it at all. But there we are. This is the wild bunch for you, great lads that they are. Well, even the birds thought it was time to go south, and we followed their example and took this time not to Asiat, but down to Sisimiut. It was a fairly placid passage across Davis Strait here until nearly right at the end. And just approaching Sisimiut, you have to go through a narrow passage with some rather notable rocks on either side. And it was just at this point that a big storm came in from the south and huge Atlantic rollers with it. And here's Nico doing something with that head sail on the inner foresail. Fortunately, I brought some ski goggles and I threw them to Ollie, who put them on so that he could see through the spray. And we made our way tentatively, but rather rapidly because of the wind, through this narrow passage into Akama Fjord and so into the harbour. And there's Ben. Well, I'd like to think holding up his hands to heaven, but knowing my friend Ben, that's probably not quite the case. But we have made it safely to Sisimiut, and unfortunately, it has become time for them to help me, first of all, to pack up the boat up, but to take their gear ashore and to begin their journey home. Of course, holding a jam session at Kangalusak Airport when they had to wait for their connection to take them on to Copenhagen and then on to Belgium. Meantime, in Sisimiut, I had the boat lifted out, which was quite an adventure in itself because these rails aren't actually attached to the ground. You just pick them up and push them in place by hand, and then the trailer sits on top of them. But it was all well, and there is the boat settling down, safe at houses and well looked after in this friendly, helpful, and much more reasonable boatyard there at Sisimiut, a little bit further south than Asiat. And it was the end of the expedition. Well, I have to take a leaf out of Andrew's book here because Christmas is approaching. But of course, you all have read this one already, Addicted to Adventure. But here is an ideal Christmas present. Oh, that's funny. I seem to be one of the authors. But it's very competitively priced compared with the Arctic and Northern waters. But of course, if you had both, you'd have absolutely no problem sailing in the Arctic or in the Antarctic, or that is the theory. But if all else fails, then by next year, hopefully, Addicted to More Adventure will be published. And I'm indebted to our own Alex Blackwell for his invaluable help in writing this book, because I couldn't possibly do it without his help. But there we are. So, risk is good. Enjoy it. And that could be the theme of this talk. Thank you very much.
Oh, that was absolutely fantastic, as usual. Wonderful, wonderful talk. I'm going to ask people to put their hands up. We've already got some, but a quick question from me. Your book, High Latitude Sailing, do you describe the Moses technique for dealing with icebergs there, or do you brush over that one?
The which technique?
The Moses technique.
I see. No, actually, I didn't think I better recommend that as a way of getting your ice flow off the top of your anchor. It has happened to me more than once, actually, ice flow coming and settling on your anchor. But no, I didn't recommend that. I just leave that one out.
That's
Maybe
good.
we should put it in Addicted to More Adventures.
Addicted to something, I'm not quite sure what, but very impressive piece of video. So we've got some hands up. Bob, do you want to close down your share screen so that folk can see you?
No, I'm hopeless at this sort of thing. I go to escape.
So I'm going to open some microphones. So first,
where do I do that?
you should have a button saying unshare somewhere, Bob.
Right. Comment, share. I've got share. It doesn't say unshare. No. Oh,
Well,
share.
not to worry. Not to worry.
Not to worry.
I'm bringing in.
Yeah, I can't see the people though. Yes.
I think you would do if you could find the unshare button.
Yeah, that's the thing. Oh, there it is. Stop share.
Yeah.
Aha! There we go.
So your first question is from Tony Davis. Tony, you're free to ask your question. Your microphone's unmuted. And then we'll go to Jill Vasey after that. Tony?
He's gone.
No, nothing heard from Tony. Jill and Tony Vasey, you're free to unmute. Jill and Tony, if you want to come in.
Are we there?
Yes, loud and clear, Jill.
Oh, you can?
Yes, loud and clear.
Well, Bob, that was absolutely great. We really enjoyed ourselves, although we've never done the north or the south. But thank you, indeed.
Not at all. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, yes, you too. Tony's here. Right.
Thank you very much, Jill. Thank you, Tony. Victor Ouija. Victor, do you want to go ahead?
Well, Bob.
Hello, how are you?
I had a short taste of it in 2014 when you were in Clyde River with a wild bunch,
Yes.
welcoming Alton Girl lost in Arctic.
Oh,
You remember that?
Vaguely, yes. Yeah, but you were handling it, so that was all right.
Can I get rid of that? Right.
Oops, we're gone.
Bob, we've got the next question is from Keith Gwyn Jones, I think it is.
Hello
Keith?
there.
Keith, your microphone is open, so please go ahead.
You see, I'm never quite sure about these things.
I'm glad other people have difficulty with the technicalities.
They're all feeling tongue-tied.
Well,
Tony,
that must be it, yes.
Tony Davis, your microphone is open. Do you want to go ahead? No, even Tony is tongue-tied. We've got some comments, Bob. So
Right.
Looking from Neil McCubbin, great presentation. I've never climbed rock to the level that you showed. Well, not many of us have, but did enough in my younger days to realize how extremely good these guys were, matched by your seamanship. You've got a comment from Randall Reeves. Great fun, Bob. Thank you very much for sharing the adventure. 3 hands clapping here. If we got some, I'm just going to bring in.
But you can't fail with the wild bunch, can you?
No, indeed. Bringing in Tim Good. Tim, your microphone's open.
Tim, yes.
Hi, Bob.
Okay, man. How are you?
Yeah, good. A serious question though here, Bob.
Oh, dear.
At what point does a vessel go from being a an expedition high latitude vessel to a luxury liner?
Well, you ought to ask Steve Brown, I think, because he is definitely in the class of the luxury liner, comfort and safety and all the rest of it, and not a bad skipper either, really. So,
If we get rid of our hot water tank, does that make us an expedition boat?
say that again.
If we get rid of our hot water, does that bring us into the realms of being an expedition boat?
It is getting closer. That is true.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and a few less gizmos on it, and you know, for simplicity.
Okay.
Steve, do you want to come in on the on the luxury liner jives? It seems to be becoming a weekly a weekly joust.
It does. No thanks to Bob, of course. I think it was him actually that said if you've got a pillow, if you've got a pillow and hot water. If you've got a pillow and hot water, it counts as a luxury liner. So that probably sums up Dodo's delight.
We certainly have no hot water, and you have to bring your own pillow. That's true.
Excellent, brilliant, Bob. You've set the bar so high now.
I was just trying to follow you, Steve.
No,
that was fabulous. Really enjoyed your talk.
Well, you can't play with the wild bunch, can you?
Oh, you can't go too far wrong. And also the scenery is pretty good, eh?
Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. You made it all possible, Bob.
Well done. Legend.
Brilliant.
Lots of talks, Bob, from Karen Melling, who says, great talk, Bob, congratulations on your lifetime award. It was great to see Dodo's delight again.
Karen,
have you still got her?
Yes, I have, and I haven't died. Somebody apparently wrote to Simon and said, "Oh, I thought he was dead." Your Dodo's delight is dead. And how are you, Karen? How are you still running your sailing school?
It was a comment on the chat line. She's obviously very welcome to come in.
Lovely to hear her. Lovely to hear her.
Okay, so we've got a question from Marianne Unarau. Mary, do you want to come in?
We're here. I last saw Dodo's delight just west of Cambridge Bay in 2013 when we were going the other way in the NWP. But I guess we don't have an expedition boat because we have a water maker, and a furnace.
Oh, how terrible.
Very soft. Tell Victor, you know. Tell Victor, you know. Thanks for a wonderful presentation. And I believe that Victor was communicating with my husband, who's next to me here, Larry Roberts. We're on Traverse 3.
All right. Thank you.
Comments coming in from Eric. Oh, he's disappeared. Sorry, they're jumping around a bit. Eric Ghislaine, thanks for taking us to Baffin Island. That we couldn't get there in 2019. Lovely to also revisit Sisumi, Siat, and Disco Bay. Now our boat is stuck in Newfoundland. We'll join the club after sailing down the Labrador Coast. We are proud of our adventures, but you take it to a whole new level. Thanks for showing us what's possible. Greetings from Switzerland. That's from Eric Ghislaine, Bob.
Great.
I'll forward all the comments to you, obviously. You had an audience, I think it topped out at about 280 again, Bob, so that's fantastic, isn't it?
Right, yes, very kind.
Yep. A question about Dodo's delight, because she's the second Dodo's delight, isn't she, Bob?
Yes, we rather glossed that bit over.
I thought you were being a bit evasive at times. Do you want to fill in the blanks?
Well, fortunately, the second Dodo's life was exactly the same as the first one, even to having a gantry.
It was the same Dodger.
And my son was persuaded, much against his will, to make the fiberglass cuddy again. So really, and then the British Register of Shipping said, well, since the other one doesn't exist, you can transfer the name, which was great because it's just as if we hadn't lost one at all. It was all the same. So that's another reason why we tend to gloss it over slightly. It just went from one to the other quite smoothly, really.
Fantastic.
So I did spend 2 or 3 years, I think, bringing it sort of up to spec for ocean sailing, bringing all the lines back to the cockpit and this sort of thing.
You've got a comment from Brian O'Flynn. You could dine out on this for the rest of your life. I suspect you already have, Bob.
He does.
A question from John Sweeney, who's very kindly asking you, where can you buy the books from?
Oh, right. Well, you could order them from me, but you have to pay the postage. But you get a signed copy, of course. Though once the Commodore of the Royal Cruising Club did pass the remark, you signed so many books, Bob, that perhaps the unsigned ones are more valuable. But some people still seem to think that signed book is good, and I'm very willing to do that.
And somebody who came to our West Coast barbecue a year or two ago, Bob, you signed some books for them when they were sailing up to Norway, and they had their books stolen. So you managed to get them twice on the way back.
They're that valuable, are they?
I think Andrea and
that's a nice story.
Andrea's in Tasmania, so yes, you have had a book stolen, which is fantastic. Message from John Amtrup, who I think you know quite well. What are your plans for 2021?
Right, well, this is quite interesting. I'm not absolutely sure, but Norway is attractive, and well, and Tim Good's going to Svalbard, which is also attractive. So I'm not sure. I have invited Britain's top climber, with whom we went to St Kilda a couple of years ago, and I know he's got some new routes in Norway in mind. So I'm wondering whether he wants to lift across. The only thing is, he's a brilliant climber, but he doesn't really like sailing very much. So I'm not sure whether he will be interested or not, but that's a possibility.
So maybe Svalbard. Have you been there before, Bob?
No, that's the attraction. I haven't been to Svalbard. It would be rather nice to do the final bit, as it were. Been to Greenland, obviously, Arctic and Antarctic, but not Svalbard. But mind you, is it really the Arctic? I mean, it's 3 days from Norway. It's a bit easy, isn't it?
And I saw Tim Good's Facebook post the other day, which was the Wild Bunch tribute band. Did he give you a hitchhike up to Norway a couple of years ago?
Yes, he did.
With much singing and
yes, that's right. He made his own Dodo Delight, Shining Blue and White. Yes. I remember we were getting into Öresund, or if that's how you pronounce it, and we suddenly had to make this video again.
Very good, very good.
Well, maybe we'll go for version 3 next year, Bob.
Right. Yes,
Svalbard.
It could be, yes.
Okay.
John Antrup says, happy and welcome to Norway. Let me know,
Yes,
with a smiley face.
That's his stepping ground.
Yes, of course. Tony Davis, who was trying to come in on the microphone but wasn't working, has put a comment saying, hello, Bob and Simon, great addition to the talks. Certainly is that. Derek Manning says, oops, they keep jumping through. Derek Manning says, do you ever think of somewhere warm to go climbing?
Too many boats in warm latitudes, temperate latitudes. I think I must be very antisocial. I like to go where there's nobody else, really.
And Scott Cooner says, we've done 2 circumnavigations, the first in a 30-foot Allied Seawind and the second in a Valiant 40. But believe me, after seeing your presentation, we will never go to the Arctic. So you've not done your bit for the Asiat Tourist Board. You'll not be allowed back. But you did send us there, Bob, and I have to say they charged us even more than they wanted to charge you. So there's obviously inflation.
Well, I did say we didn't really want you all up
there. Message from Yabba Ding. Good to see you again, Bob. I was aboard Novara in Samfjord Fjord. Perhaps we were the nutty bunch. I can vouch that you that you were, if anything, playing shy on the wine that evening. So you're witnessing your defence.
Yeah, good. That's great. Don't ask Steve about it though.
Anybody on the panel want to open their microphones and come in? Judith, you've got a tough act to follow next week.
May I ask a question, Bob?
It's going to be so hard to follow this next week. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Well, Bob, I know you've had some pretty rough passages to and from Greenland.
Yes.
Tell me how Dodo's Delight you manage the bad weather, and I think you've hove to a few times, but
yes,
what techniques
it
do you
has
use there?
varied considerably depending, I think, on the strength of the wind. But I mean, coming back with the Wild Bunch in 2010, we had gone through Frans Christian Sund, and then the wind, it must have been sort of southeast, because it was pushing us further and further towards Iceland. But then a depression, I think it was an ex-hurricane, came along the Nova Scotia coast as it does and out into the Atlantic. And it came sort of slightly, or the outer rings of it were affecting us. And I remember we actually hove to on that trip from Frans Christian Sound to Western Isles of Scotland 3 times for wind, and once because there was play in the steering and we wanted to fix that. So we hove to 4 times really. On those occasions, we hove to, backing the jib against the main. On other occasions, coming across further south, perhaps bigger winds, I have, and people frown on it, but I've just laid a howl. In other words, taken all the sail down. You do lie across the angle of, that's the trouble with it, the angle of the waves, fine until one breaks just as it's coming to you and hits you hard on the side and things shoot across the cabin and so forth. But I have been rolled once, but not in those conditions. And I haven't been rolled doing that, and I have used that probably more than people think you should. I remember, actually not in the Atlantic, off Cape Wrath in Scotland, coming back from the Faroes, force 910 or so, really huge seas. In fact, the lad who was on watch or sitting out there in the cockpit, we were lying a howl, he remarked afterwards that he was sitting there and he'd see the wave coming and he thought, we're really not going to get up that. But of course, the boat just lifted with the wave and then went down the other side. And again, rather surprisingly, that lying a howl did work in that occasion. The really big storm we had south of Cape Farewell in 1998, when it was, I think, we ran before with no sail up, still doing 4, 5, 6 knots with no sail up. But that's the time when a freak wave came up behind us. 2 waves must have joined together. And very, very steep fronted wave just picked us up and nobody could control anything. It just shot down into the trough, banged on its side, and a little split in the top sides, and all the woodwork on the starboard side was pushed in 2 inches. But we managed to sail to Nuuk and lift it out and repaired the crack in Nuuk. But that's the only time that I've run before. But that was probably the biggest storm that we had. Bigger actually than anything we got going around Cape Horn. Cape Horn, well, Jerome Ponce, I met him in Port Stanley and said, you know, it's a bit late in the year because our mast had fallen down in Antarctica and we'd jury rigged back to Port Stanley. as one does. And I said, you know, we're a bit late. And what about Cape Horn at this time of year? April, yes. More gales, less severe. And that's how it turned out. Gale after gale after gale, but nothing like the huge, great storms that you can get around Cape Horn. So, yeah, the Cape Farewell was actually bigger and rougher than Cape Horn.
And Bob, I think you were with Steve on Novara coming back from South Georgia when you lay to the Ceres Drogue for two or three days, I think, if I got the story right. But how did that compare?
Well, of course, joking apart, it was difficult to compare it because it is a bigger boat, and therefore it can handle it more easily. But I mean, the Jordan Ceres Drogue worked marvelously for us. It's the first time I'd ever heard of it, let alone used it. And as Steve will tell you, it was quite complicated putting it out, and even more complicated getting it back in again. But it did do the job splendidly, slowing us right down to one and a half to 2 knots, and keeping us going downwind steadily. And it was an ideal way to ride out a big storm like that.
Great, Bob. There's lots of questions and comments coming in, but I think I'll probably just cut and paste these to you. You've got Alex and Daria Blackwell, your publishers or assistant publishers, say wonderful talk, Bob. We're dizzy just thinking about those heights. Hugs to you from both the Blackwells.
No, marvelous man.
So we've kept you talking for, I don't know, let's have a look, an hour and a half. I think you've done your you've done your bit for tonight, and I think we should probably wind it up there, Bob. But thank you very, very much indeed. It's been
Can I just ask, did you say what time of the year you were there?
Where was that?
What time of the year?
Right. I went out in June. So really the expedition was July, August, and we came back in the first 2 weeks of September to Sisimiut. Really late September is getting a bit late to cross the Atlantic from Greenland. I have done it and suffered as a result. Yeah, I didn't put that into Andrew. We did actually run before force 10 in the Atlantic once, with a little bit of storm jib up just to keep us going. But yes, October is definitely too late. Mind you, David Scott Cowper with his marvelous machine in 2013, coming back from the Northwest Passage, he went across in October, but I think his sailing partner Jane was not particularly impressed because the boat was thrown all over the place, in fact.
Judith, you're mute.
No, just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
okay.
Thank you very, very much indeed. And we'll post the video up later on tonight, and I'll send you the list of attendees. So if you want to write to anybody who's asked you the questions that are online, then you can do that. And thank you very much. You've had a long day, and you can crack open that glass of whiskey now.
Oh, right. Oh, that's good. Okay. So I'm going to leave the meeting.
Thank you, Bob. Yes. Good.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Trish.
Yeah, thank you, Simon.
Yeah.